Welcome to the Henry George Daily Devotional episode 59. We have made it to book 6, The Remedy. Very exciting. This book has 2 chapters. Chapter 1, Insufficiency of Remedies Currently Advocated, and Chapter 2, The True Remedy. This is it, boys and girls. Here's a nice quote from de Tocqueville. A new and fair division of the goods and rights of this world should be the main object of those who conduct human affairs. When I was writing a Georgism blog post the other day, I went in search of a quote from de Tocqueville that runs along the lines of, in America, everyone thinks somebody who works hard should get their own little fortune. Everyone thinks that that it's a meritocracy, but in fact, it is actually quite difficult and very chance-based about who earns a fortune. I tried to search the text for it. I then asked ChatGPT. ChatGPT generated a quote which sounded exactly like what I wanted. And then I searched the text for that quote from ChatGPT and found no matches. I asked ChatGPT if they made it up. ChatGPT apologized, said they did make it up, or they paraphrased, and tried to give me like 3 other ones. I searched the text for those and never found an exact match and was quite unhappy. Anyway, excuse me. John Stuart Mill says, when the object is to raise the permanent condition of a people, small means do not merely produce small effects, they produce no effect at all. Alright, Henry George, Chapter 1, The Insufficiency of Remedies Currently Advocated. George says, in tracing to its source the cause of increasing poverty amid advancing wealth, we have discovered the remedy. But before passing to that branch of our subject, it will be well to review the tendencies or remedies which are currently relied on or advocated. I'm going to try tracing sort of as I go. We should review the remedies advocated. See chapter title. The remedy to which our conclusions point is at once radical and simple, so radical that on the one side it will not be fairly considered so long as any faith remains in the efficacy of less caustic measures, so simple that on the other side its real efficacy and comprehensiveness are likely to be overlooked until the effect of more elaborate measures is estimated. Otherwise, our proposed solution will be rejected due to its radical simplicity. No, there's radicalness and simpleness. The tendencies and measures which current literature and discussions show to be more or less relied on or advocated as calculated to relieve poverty and distress among the masses, may be divided into 6 classes. I do not mean that there are so many distinct parties or schools of thought, but merely that, for the purpose of our inquiry, prevailing opinions and proposed measures may be so grouped for review. Remedies which, for the sake of greater convenience and clearness, we shall consider separately, are often combined in thought. That's funny. We finally caught up to where when I first joined the Henry George book club on the Georgism Discord. This is like where they were when I joined. Of course, I'd already read the book myself, but I was a little bit torn when starting this read through to be like, I would like to be reading what they're reading, but now I'm starting to start. All for John. There are many persons who still retain a comfortable belief that material I'm going to add this to my précis. 6 groups of current reasons for poverty in wealth. There are many persons who still retain a comfortable belief that material progress will ultimately extirpate poverty. We can just call them techno-optimists, or just, well, techno-optimists are definitely a subset. And there are many who look to prudential restraint upon the increase of population as the most efficacious means. But the fallacies of these views has already been sufficiently shown. Let us now consider what may be hoped for. 1. From greater economy in government. 2. From better education of the working classes and improved habits of industry and thrift. 3. From combinations of workmen for the advance of wages. I guess that's unions. 4. From the cooperation of labor and capital. I guess that's the techno-optimists, maybe. 5. From government direction and interference. Yeah, just greater cooperation would mean labor saving advancements or something, I don't know. 5. From government direction and interference. Yes, this is a smoother, less corrupt government. This is from fancy government manipulations. Of course, this is all before the Fed. And 6, from a more general distribution of land. That's if you simply forcibly redistributed land, which you'd think might be sort of what George ends up advocating for, but it's a significant but subtle difference, his radical and simple solution. Under these 6 heads, I think we may in essential form review all hopes and propositions for the relief of social distress, short of the simple but far-reaching measure which I shall propose. 1. From greater economy in government. I guess we'll be dealing with these one at a time. Until a very few years ago, it was an article of faith with Americans, a belief shared by European liberals, that the poverty of the downtrodden masses of the Old World was due to aristocratic and monarchical institutions. This belief has rapidly passed away with the appearance in the United States, under Republican institutions, of social distress of the same kind, if not of the same intensity as that prevailing in Europe. But social distress is still largely attributed to the immense burdens which existing governments impose. The great debts, the military and naval establishments, the extravagance which is characteristic as well of republican as of monarchical rulers, and especially characteristic of the administration of great cities. We thought that aristocracy was to blame for poverty, but USA has poverty too. And worse? Question mark. To these must be added in the United States the robbery involved in the protective tariff, which for every 25 cents it puts in the treasury takes $1, and it may be 4 or 5 out of the pocket of the consumer. I've heard that the tariffs in those days were basically like a sales tax. I am not a historian. I do not know the exact manner in which tariffs were levied. George continues. And I'm now going to check. I guess we'll go through we'll go through like 2 or 3 of these, I guess, in today's chit chat. There seems to be an evident connection between the immense sums thus taken from the people and the privations of the lower classes, and it is upon a superficial view natural to suppose that a reduction in the enormous burdens thus uselessly imposed would make it easier for the poorest to get a living. but a consideration of the matter in the light of the economic principles heretofore traced out will show that this would not be the effect. A little confusing. A reduction in the amount taken from the aggregate produce of a community by taxation would be simply equivalent to an increase in the power of net production. It would in effect add to the productive power of labor, just as do the increasing density of population and improvement in the arts, and as the advantage in the one case must go to the owners of land in increased rent, so would the advantage in the other. Yeah. So even if we alleviate these taxes, we lower taxes, the benefit all accrues to the landowners. I think this has been one of the chief mistakes I've made in my youth when believing in libertarian capitalism, where I always thought that minimizing taxation would result in a kind of freedom and a just reward for everyone's labor. And of course, I failed to appreciate the role of land. Of course, nothing I read ever spoke of these things in this way. Although the big clue would have been that some of the economists I read, Eric, whatever his name was, no, it wasn't that guy. I guess it was, he's not really the economist. The rich dad, poor dad guy is not an economist, but I definitely in high school thought that, creating passive labor chiefly through purchasing of, rental properties seemed like a fantastic way of making wealth. I played this game called Cash Flow, which was always joked around. Oh, Cash Flow game as like the new Monopoly. It's from the Rich Dad Poor Dad guy. Should probably get this board game and play it at my board game nights. I mean, yeah, these guys had it figured out how to speculate. $90 for Cash Flow. How much is it, Cash Flow board game? Cash Flow for kids? $68 here. Cash Flow 202. I feel like I need to start my Georgist meetup and bring Monopoly and Cash Flow for people to play. And then be like, yep, how is this not the situation we find ourselves in? Anyway, that was a tangent from discussing tariffs. Now, there seems to be an evident connection between the provision. Maybe I read this sentence, but I'll read it again. There seems to be an evident connection between the immense sums thus taken from the people and the privations of the lower classes, and it is upon a superficial view natural to suppose that a reduction in the enormous burdens thus uselessly imposed would make it easier for the poorest to get a living. But a consideration of the matter in the light of the economic principles heretofore traced out will show that this would not be the effect. A reduction in the amount taken, yeah. I read this. In the amount taken from the aggregate produce of a community by taxation would be simply equivalent to an increase in the power of net production. It would, in effect, add to the productive power of labor, just as do the increasing density of population improvement in the arts, as the advantage in the one case goes and must go to the owners of land in increased rents, so would the advantage in the other. Yeah, I went way back. From the produce of the labor and capital of England are now supported the burden of an immense debt, an established church, an expensive royal family, a large number of sinecurists. I of course know what this means, but since you don't know what this means, I'll Google it and I'll read the precise definition. A sinecure is an office carrying a salary or otherwise generating income that requires or involves little or no responsibility, labor, or active service. This was something I remember sort of when you read like classic literature and you hear about people getting these sorts of like assignments from the government or something, and I was always like baffled, like what are those? And they just like get money. Let's see, the other things supported by the produce from the labor and capital of England: a great army, a great navy, and that's it. Suppose the debt repudiated, and the church disestablished, the royal family set adrift to make a living for themselves, the sinecurists cut off, the army disbanded, and the officers and men of the navy discharged, and the ships sold. An enormous reduction in taxation would thus become possible. There would be a great addition to the net produce which remains to be distributed among the parties to production. But it would be only such an addition as improvement in the arts has been for a long time constantly making, and not so great an addition as steam and machinery have made within the last 20 or 30 years. Recall, improvements in the arts means technology, arts of production. And he's saying that, yes, the advances that have been made through steam and machinery have been more than enough to compensate for the current costs of the church, the navy, the army, and the sinecurists, our friends. And as these additions have not alleviated pauperism but have only increased rent, so would this. English landowners would reap the whole benefit. I will not dispute that if all these things could be done suddenly and without the destruction and expense in a revolution, there might be a temporary improvement in the condition of the lowest class, but such a sudden and peaceable reform is manifestly impossible. And if it were, any temporary improvement would, by the process we now see going on in the United States, be ultimately swallowed up by increased land values. And so, this is why I no longer bother advocating for dissolving public education in really any form right now, since that if I used to I used to definitely advocate for getting rid of any public colleges, and I would probably get rid of public high school as well. I mean, I'd probably get rid of all of it, really, but that really, people then think I'm crazy. But I would always say just give that money back to the people. Poor families would be way better off if they had an extra, like, $10,000 or something or more a year for each kid. I mean, 10,000 is on the low end, probably. But now, as a Georgist, I've realized that would only allow landlords to raise rents higher and suck up that money. And then while those who are not renters would just get to pocket the money. And so, in the United States, if we were to reduce public expenditures to the lowest possible point, quick comment. I would say since the age of like 12, I've been ideologically confused and frustrated at a very fundamental level about society and justice, and I had mostly despaired of ever having a significant understanding, like holistically. I felt like I understood pockets. I felt like the nature of markets and price signaling and supply and demand with elastic goods, more or less, depending on how elastic they were. I could understand those in isolation. And then the rampant unfairness in society that seems systematic and just baked in, I could only hand wave generally at like, yeah, there's corrupt government here and there, and I don't know, and oil, But it is wild to me now, the explanatory power that I feel like Georgism has given me. And I learned about Georgism over 2 years ago, and I sort of waited and thought about it and read about it for a year, maybe almost a year and a half, or almost 2 years maybe. Sort of thinking the rug would be pulled out from under me, even though from like the first couple hours of reading it, I could not see how it could be wrong. And I still have not seen how it could be wrong. It's just, it's there waiting for us. I don't know. George writes, and so in the United States, if we were, and I know that people don't love, some people react harshly against calling it Georgism after a man's name. Uh, I don't know. That's just funny to me. So many things are named after people that I've like learned about and studied when I studied science and when I studied religion and when I've studied some history, and then, like I was just reading about, is Shakespeare real this morning, that kind of stuff. And that stuff just doesn't bother me too much anymore. Um, Even if George ended up being an extreme pervert or something, while I do have this weird narrative attachment to him as a man after reading about him and learning about his life, uh, I don't think that would much affect my view of the structure of society. Although I guess then I would be moved to advocate for a different name, I suppose, just like people want to throw down slaveholder statues, I guess, which I have mixed feelings about. Considering how flawed most men were in history, how can you celebrate any of them in some sense? If yeah, well, I don't, anyway, side points. A lot of side points today. I think we're only going to make it through this first bad incorrect remedy advocated the idea of greater economy in government. So yeah, if our government didn't provide for the army, the navy, the church, and the sinecurists, and so in the United States, if we were to reduce public expenditures to the lowest possible point and meet them by revenue taxation, the benefit could certainly not be greater than that which railroads have brought. There would be more wealth left in the hands of the people as a whole, just as the railroads have put more wealth in the hands of the people as a whole, but the same inexorable laws would operate as to its distribution. I'm sure you guys all know what inexorable means, but just in case, it means impossible to stop or prevent, which you could have understood from context anyway. The condition of those who live by their labor would not ultimately be improved. A dim consciousness of this pervades. You know, I'm just going to pretend, this way if I check every word, you can feel good about yourselves that you know some of these words that I'm already looking up. Although I will claim that I already know what pervades means and all of the other words clearly. Spread through and be perceived in every part of. No, it's just struck me that I've read this before, and the whole point of reading this is, well, I don't know. Half the point is to persuade John, kinda. I mean, I know he listens to most of these. Half the reason is to just go through it over again for me, and half the reason is to try to share it with other people, which is good Georgist math. There's three halves make a whole. A dim consciousness of this pervades, or rather is beginning to pervade, the masses, and constitutes one of the grave political, what does this word mean? Relating to the government or the public affairs of a country, relating to the ideas or strategies of a particular party or group in politics, interested in or active in politics. what is politics? What is the definition of politics? The activities associated with the governance of a country or other area, especially the debate or conflict among individuals or parties having or hoping to achieve power. The grave political difficulties that are closing in around the American Republic in 1879. Those who have nothing but their labor, and especially the proletarians. What are the proletarians? A member of the proletariat. And the proletariat is workers or working class people regarded collectively, often used with reference to Marxism. The growth of the industrial proletariat of the cities, a growing class, care little about the prodigality, the quality of spending or using large amounts of money, time, energy, etc., especially in a way that is not very wise. Made famous by the prodigal son, care little about the prodigality of government, and in many cases are disposed to look upon it as a good thing. Furnishing employment. Yeah, you hear this. Making jobs. What a funny, making jobs is who care, make wealth and do it justly. It's such a cart before the horse thing to be like, let's make jobs. Or circulate money, yes. George is so good. Or putting money in circulation. The velocity of money. Tweed, who robbed New York as a guerrilla chief, might levy upon a captured town, and who was but a type of the new banditti who are grasping the government of all our cities. I don't know the historicity of this story. Banditti means a robber or outlaw belonging to a gang and typically operating in an isolated or lawless area. Tweed was undoubtedly popular with the majority of the voters, though his thieving was notorious and his spoils were blazoned in big diamonds and lavish personal expenditure. After his indictment, he was triumphantly elected to the Senate, and even when a recaptured fugitive, was frequently cheered on his way from court to prison. He had robbed the public treasury of many millions, but the proletarians felt that he had not robbed them, and the verdict of political economy is the same as theirs. A veritable Robin Hood. George writes, "Let me be clearly understood. I do not say that governmental economy is not desirable, but simply that reduction in the expenses of government can have no direct effect in extirpating poverty." Extirpating means it is a gerund. Oh, the gerund is extirpating. Yes, the ing word. Root out and destroy completely. In extirpating poverty and increasing, another gerund, wages so long as land is monopolized. What does this word mean? Of an organization or group obtain exclusive possession or control of a trade, commodity, or service. Yeah. Although this is true, yet even with sole reference to the interests of the lowest class, no effort should be spared to keep down. Oh, I've forgotten to keep on taking notes while I read. Guess we'll have to do that after. No effort should be spared to keep down useless expenditures. The more complex and extravagant government becomes, the more it gets to be a power distinct from and independent of the people, and the more difficult does it become to bring questions of real public policy to a popular decision. Look at our elections in the United States. Upon what do they turn? The most momentous problems are pressing upon us, yet so great is the amount of money in politics, so large are the personal interests involved, that the most important questions of government are but little considered. The average American voter has prejudices, party feelings, general notions of a certain kind, but he gives to the fundamental questions of government not much more thought than a streetcar horse does to the profits of the line. Were this not the case, so many hoary abuses. What have we got here? Hoary is an Old English word that comes from hoar, which shares its meanings. Both words refer to anything that is old and has the whitened look of age. Hoary abuses could not have survived, and so many new ones been added. Anything that tends to make government simple and inexpensive tends to put it under control of the people and to bring questions of real importance to the front. But no reduction in the expenses of government can of itself cure or mitigate the evils that arise from a constant tendency to the unequal distribution of wealth. And so concludes that part 1 of chapter 1, greater economy and government. Yeah, so George is not against greater economy and government. He's actually for it, especially here where he's saying this will allow the voters to focus on the actual fundamental problems and questions of fundamental questions of government. However, simply an efficient government will not a just society make. All right, that's it for today's episode.